Mafia Definitive Edition. Rarely do we ever come across a remake for a game that so fundamentally enhances the original game's story and experience more broadly. Especially in the modern day when it seems like every game and franchise is receiving a remake. Proof positive, just an hour before I started recording for this video, rumors surfaced that Naughty Dog was going to be remaking in its entirety The Last of Us. Rumor has it they will be spending the next year and a half or so rebuilding the game using the tools from the sequel. And while remakes can be a great excuse to replay some of our favorite games from years past, they also commonly exhibit the wafting stink of a quick cash grab. No one thinks that the original Last of Us is so outdated that it needs to be remade in order to be played and enjoyed by modern audiences. Anyone with an ounce of critical thinking ability will realize that this is simply an effort on Sony's part to pair a game release with a franchise debut on HBO. Now don't get me wrong, the businessman in me appreciates such a strategy immensely. After all, when the Witcher Netflix series launched, The Witcher 3 saw its highest peak player numbers on Steam since the game's launch. Just imagine if there was another game or even a remake or remaster of The Witcher 3 that launched during this window. They would have had actual Scrooge McDuck amounts of money.
Ah! It's not a liquid! It's a great many pieces of solid matter that form a hard floor-like surface! Ah!
However, even though some industry players are transparently cashing in on their most successful franchises, remaking games that frankly don't need a remake, some studios are employing this strategy to bring some of their most prized creations to a whole new audience. And the best example I've come across is Mafia Definitive Edition. Now, to get an idea of just how fundamentally transformative this remake is, you need to look at the original in its purest form. I actually went onto Steam, bought, installed, and then played through the original game for this video. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a lengthy side-by-side comparison video. I simply wanted to be able to show you what the game looks like in its original state compared to what it looks like after being remade with modern tools. You see, the game originally launched in 2002. It was considered an incredibly cinematic experience for the time, which is important to understand. You see, in 2002, games weren't all about the narrative. While modern-day AAA games usually need to have a compelling story to be competitive, in most circumstances at least, that wasn't always the case. Mafia came into the industry at a time when narratives were just starting to find themselves at center stage. Halo Combat Evolved had launched the year before, as had Grand Theft Auto 3, both games that would go on to be considered classics for their gameplay and storytelling. Importantly though, both of these games were primarily known for their gameplay. Halo was of course a first-person shooter and served as a launch title for the original Xbox, and on the other hand, Grand Theft Auto 3 was a third-person action-adventure game that gave players the opportunity to live a crazy drug and crime-fueled life vicariously through the game's protagonist, Claude. Sure, they had stories, but those weren't why people were playing them. At least, not at first. Mafia, on the other hand, had one goal, and that was to tell a compelling story through the medium of video games. And in that regard, it was way ahead of its time. It really was the first game that prided itself on being a narrative experience first, featuring some gameplay instead of the other way around. Looking back at the game today, you can see what they were trying to accomplish. Limited by the hardware of the time, much of the writing, dialogue, and acting is unfortunately lost in translation in this original version. Now, according to some reports that I was able to find, the character models in this original version of the game had to be comprised of between 1,000 and 1,500 polygons. This was actually the only way that they could get multiple characters on screen at a time and render the cutscenes off the console directly. Now that might sound like a lot, but it really isn't compared to the 45 to 50,000 polygons that comprise the models that you see in the remake. Now all this means is that the character models are able to exhibit a higher fidelity, allowing the developer to communicate more efficiently through them. The original characters were limited in their expressions by the hardware, only able to make broad gestures, exaggerated nods, and the occasional slouch. much. The faces couldn't move, the eyes didn't blink, and the eyes themselves couldn't move to adjust according to the situation, leading to fairly uncomfortable situations where it looks like the character's eyes are going in separate directions while speaking to someone. Now, please understand, I'm not hating on the original developers. This was literally the best that they could do at the time. And to be honest, the original Mafia looks pretty in line with what other games at the time were presenting. However, in the modern day, it's basically unplayable. And so, when I heard that Hangar 13 was going to remake the game, I was ecstatic. The story in Mafia is so truly fantastic. It's heartbreaking to think that so many people who could enjoy it would have passed up on it simply because it was contained within an outdated shell. Thanks to the work of the fine folks over at Hangar 13, we have what is, in my mind, one of the best remakes ever made. And allow me to tell you why I think this, and also point out some of the things I think that could have been improved. So consider this your spoiler warning. From this point on, I'm going to be showing clips from the entirety of the game. If you enjoy narrative games to any degree, you owe it to yourself to play Mafia Definitive Edition. I recommend it wholeheartedly. I played it across my Xbox Series S, Series X, and PC, and it ran phenomenally well on all of them. There really is no excuse. You should give this remake a shot. Trust me, you'll thank me for it. But before we jump into everything, I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for every kind of learner. Whether you're looking to discover a new skill or refine something that you've been working at for years, Skillshare has the classes to help you achieve your goals. I, for one, struggle with time management and the ideation process when it comes to this YouTube channel, and sure enough, Skillshare has classes that have helped me with these issues. Specifically, I recommend Productivity for Creatives by Thomas Frank. He's got a bunch of great ideas for training inspiration to the point where it becomes like a muscle, to the point where you never even struggle with writer's block moving forward. And I can attest it actually does work if you put what he says to practice. I've also taken classes on editing with Premiere Pro, my software of choice, or using Photoshop, and I even took a class on cold calling for my day job. There's no ads, they're always adding new classes taught by industry experts, and it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. And even better, the first 1,000 subscribers of this YouTube channel that go and click the link in the description below will get a free trial of the premium membership so that you can explore your creativity and refine your passions. Again, click the link in the description box below to start your free trial of a premium membership today. To begin, I feel obligated to address the elephant in the room. Mafia Definitive Edition looks fantastic. As a game critic, I often feel conflicted as to whether or not I should bring up a game's visuals. After all, when I create a critique, I'm often creating it not just for the viewers that will watch it the day that the video launches, but also for those that will watch it for 2, 3, 4, or 5 years down the line. And when you're trying to create something that's timeless like that, bringing up something that's so quickly outdated is usually a bad idea. Hell, if you're watching this video in 2022 or 2023, you're probably gonna say, wow, Mafia Definitive Edition doesn't look very good. This guy should see what Grand Theft Auto 6 looks like. And so because of this, I usually avoid discussing something like graphics. However, here it's important to point out how much better the game looks and how much the new animation system helps achieve the original developer's vision. Those original writers, directors, and animators clearly wanted to make an interactive film. A story that could be told over 10 to 15 hours with interactive gameplay elements that help immerse players in the world of New Heaven and, in turn, the narrative the characters are playing a part within. However, at the time, this was the best that they could do. There was a lot left up to your imagination. Facial expressions simply aren't present in the original because they couldn't be. File sizes had to be minimal, leading to audio compression aggressively tearing apart audio clips to the point where the only recordings that could survive the compression process were needlessly loud and equalized. In other words, the only way of delivering audio files to the final game disc was to compress those recordings in a way that mandated loud and monotone delivery. This is one of the reasons why most games of this generation feature dialogue delivered in this bizarrely shouty style.
I ain't no businessman. And even if I were, I wouldn't be doing business with the likes of you. I don't usually do business with your kind either.
And lastly, the world of New Heaven was a character of its own in Mafia. It was the world that bred and nurtured the characters that we learned to love and then learned to hate. It was the canvas upon which the narrative was drawn, and as a result, the original artists tried to deliver a living, breathing world unlike anything anyone had seen at the time. However, back in 2002, the hardware just couldn't keep up. Draw distances were low, buildings were often repeated, NPCs all looked the same, and the city itself was needlessly difficult to navigate, with major markers that would normally be necessary to navigate a world like this being largely absent since the draw distance was so low. All told, there were many things that they wanted to do but just couldn't pull off. But fast forward to 2020, and that all changed. The character models are now able to communicate emotion clearly and efficiently. It's by no means photorealistic, but it's to a point where the actors can actually deliver their performances to the audience instead of just hoping that they can imagine the performances between the plain textured faces and the occasional offhand wave. Furthermore, audio is much better. Voices can raise and lower, be quiet or loud, and the actor's delivery can be captured in its pure and original form. And New Heaven itself is fantastically well realized to boot. Now, while New Heaven is not an actual place, it is based on several actual places and within a time period that actually did occur. Think how Gotham is loosely based on Chicago, even though it's in its own universe. Now, I, for one, love historical recreations in video games. It's actually one of the reasons that I fell in love with the Assassin's Creed franchise, because it allows me to explore a world that no longer exists and that can never exist again. But it's more than that. It's about exploring a reality that my ancestors knew, but that I can only imagine. And understandably, this can be an incredibly difficult task to undertake. Even Ubisoft, with their thousands of developers, rarely nail it when it comes to recreating these historical places. They may be able to create something that visually resembles the location at that time, but getting the world to actually feel real is a whole nother issue. For instance, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is set in ancient Greece, but I don't think anyone will say that while exploring that world, you honestly felt as though you had been transported to a time long past. On the other hand, a game such as LA Noire absolutely nails the theming and tone. While the world itself, as far as exploration is concerned, may not be living and breathing to the extent that you would hope to see, when paired with the narrative, the acting, and the writing, you get a world that is completely believable. Again, this is something the developers wanted to achieve in 2002, but at the time, recreating a believable metropolitan epicenter that's supposed to look and feel and act as though it was from 70 years before is actually far more difficult than you might initially imagine. But they did it. And the result in the 2020 remake is nothing short of phenomenal. Now, beyond graphical changes, there were also slight adjustments made to the script itself. The original material was by no means bad. After all, the story they created back in 2002 is, in my opinion, one of the best ever crafted for a video game. However, much of the dialogue had to be written in a heavy-handed manner. This was pretty obviously because the character models were unable to communicate emotions, so the dialogue had to do all of it. And furthermore, with the audio difficulties that we discussed earlier, the delivery had to be ham-fisted as well. All of this means that if you were to directly recreate the exact same script today, all of those scenes in the dialogue would come off as needlessly bombastic and lacking nuance. But thankfully, when Hangar 13 was working on the remake for Mafia, they reevaluated the original script. They wanted to make sure that they retained the original meaning, emotion, and delivery, but they needed to repackage it so that modern technology could present it in the best possible way. This means that a lot of dialogue has been restructured to be more subtle. The main characters' faces are able to communicate sentences worth of dialogue thanks to the new animation systems, and the final product is a narrative game with dialogue that competes against the heaviest hitters in the industry today. And the major component of this improved delivery is the improved performances. All of the dialogue has been recaptured and the scenes have been redone using motion capture technology. While certain dramatic scenes in the original were performed by blocky characters that were all hand animated, these new performers were given the ability to tell the script's story as directly as possible. And to top it all off, the music has all been re-recorded, and it retains the power and emotion of the original recordings while enhancing them in effectively every way. Now, as for the game itself, they've reworked basically every gameplay system. The driving actually feels like you're driving now. In the original, if you turn the steering wheel for longer than 3 or 4 seconds, the car would begin to drift uncontrollably like you were driving on an icy lake. And thankfully, Mafia Definitive Edition uses the driving systems that were built for Mafia 3, and they work so much better, it's not even funny. Proof positive, that one notoriously difficult race with the German is actually winnable now. Back in the day, this race was so difficult, it often required hours of attempts to complete. Granted, this was mostly due to the rubber banding AI that effectively made it so no matter how well you were racing, the enemies would always be neck and neck with you. But nonetheless, I appreciate that the race feels fair now. But please understand, it's not all good. There are still some issues that hold over from the original and that Hangar 13 has been unable to fix even in the latest titles in the franchise. Namely, the gunplay. Now, I'll be the first to admit it, I'm not a huge fan of third-person cover-based gunplay games. I much prefer first-person shooters, as long as they don't make me horrifically motion sick. However, this can be done well in some circumstances. I haven't come across anybody, for instance, that says that The Last of Us Part 2's gunplay system wasn't massively impressive. Specifically, it was fluid, intelligent, and felt fair thanks to the cutting-edge AI. However, almost all of these elements are absent in Mafia Definitive Edition. Getting into cover is still very clunky. This has been an issue since the original Mafia and even in Mafia 3. The weapons, in my opinion, feel too light. There's rarely a punch to them, which is really disappointing considering that we're playing as members of the Mafia, who are slinging Tommy guns and shotguns at anyone who pisses us off. In addition, there's very little variability between the weapons that you'll use throughout the course of the game. I get it, this is primarily a narrative experience, but I don't think it's necessarily an excuse for stale gunplay. And that's a major issue, because this game basically has 3 parts: the narrative, car sections, and gunplay sections. And while the car sections are massively improved and feel pretty good, the gunplay makes up a third of what this game has to offer. So it's too bad to see that it feels outdated at the start. And the last thing I want to bring up is something that I feel really shallow for pointing out. It very well could be that I'm the only person on the planet who noticed this and was bothered by it, but I feel as though I should mention it in case I'm not alone. The mic placement on the actors was such that any time they inhaled or exhaled through their nose, it was captured very sharply through the microphone. This makes it so when you're wearing a good pair of headphones or, God forbid, playing on a nice sound system, every time the actors inhale or exhale, it feels as though they're blowing straight on your face.
No. I was a cab driver back in 30.
Again, I may be the only person that noticed this or was bothered by it, but it's something that I noticed repeatedly throughout the entirety of the game's story. This could be fixed by tweaking an equalizer, perhaps, to bring down certain frequency ranges, but my guess would be that this was simply an issue with the hardware that was used to record the performances themselves. It's not a big deal, but it's something I would like to see addressed and fixed in whatever game Hangar 13 puts out next. All told, the game is phenomenal. It stands on its own as a fantastic video game, not just as a fantastic remake. Now, whenever I talk about a remake to friends or here on the YouTube channel, I often feel as though there's an asterisk next to any recommendations or prohibitions that I deliver. It can often feel as though a remake is less deserving of praise compared to other games that have been built from the ground up, and I think that this is fair in many situations. After all, most of the ideation process has already been completed. The original developers sorted out how the story was going to be, the tone, and often went through the process of trial and error to find out what worked and what didn't. So it makes sense that a remake would come off as less impressive. However, it's in these situations where you have to be very specific about the game in question and have a clear understanding of what work was actually redone and what work remains from the original. In the case of a game such as Warcraft 3 Reforged, which was supposed to be an entire remake of the original, we ended up with a developer cutting corners and taking shortcuts every step of the way. They claimed that they would rework the cutscenes, that they would introduce higher quality assets, that they would fix long-standing bugs and issues. However, most of the improvements described during the game's marketing campaign were either largely absent or had been completed, but in such a poor way that most players found the original far more functional than the remake. In other words, they remade the game, but did a worse job. In these cases, it is absolutely fair to call out the remake for what it is. On the other hand, you have remakes such as Final Fantasy VII Remake and Mafia Definitive Edition. These games take the foundations that were laid so many years before and build something familiar and yet new atop them. Final Fantasy VII Remake added tons of new content, all new dialogue, gameplay systems, and world-building elements that don't simply repackage the original game, but rather enhance and add to it. And in the case of Mafia Definitive Edition, we have a remake that so thoroughly captures the intent and soul of the original game that it truly earns its name as the definitive edition of one of the best narrative games ever made. But that's all from me. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like and be sure to subscribe. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video.